Hey folks, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Chris.
And this is Tim.
This is Adam.
And normally we'd be giving you our hot take of the game that we just played, but we're not going to do that tonight. We're actually going to talk a little bit about a different topic, house rules. Some people love them, some people hate them, some people don't care one way or the other, but we're going to get into that and we're going to see what this group has to say about house rules.
So let's start a little bit about what house rules are. Do you guys have a definition? Like, Adam, when you hear the term house rules, what do you think of?
To me, that seems like a rule or variation that is perhaps used that is not specifically laid out in the rulebook. And that is kind of my broad definition of a house rule. What about you, Tim? You have something different?
Well, no, I think that's true. If you go on like Board Game Geek, there's a lot of user variants, or what do they call them? Fan variants of games. And I think fan variants are another type of house rule. Sometimes house rules are really simple. The classic house rule is Monopoly, right? Where, free parking, if you land on free parking, you get the money that was paid out to the bank earlier in the game and stuff like that.
I feel like the entire game of Monopoly just gets completely house ruled. Like the rulebook's just thrown out the window and people just do their own thing. Like.
That's funny you said that, Tim, because I was going to say that if you weren't, so I'm glad you did.
So what are some reasons that people do house rules?
Yeah, I think one house rule reason is to maybe, if you're playing with kids or something, and you want to simplify the game a little bit, you can take out some of the complexity that, for instance, I was playing Dice Throne the other day, and I was playing with, I think she was 8 or 9. So at the beginning of each turn, you gain a combat point and you draw a card, and then the cards do, draw more cards or pay this amount of combat points to do this. A kid doesn't want to do that. A kid just wants to roll the dice and see what the dice turn up, and then roll the dice 2 more times and see which combination they made, and then attack the other guy. In that instance, it worked really well, and I don't know how much experience she's had with like board games. I mean, I tried to kind of coach her along with that, but it ended up just getting washed out, and the game worked just fine at that level. Roll some dice, smash the other guy, next guy's turn.
Chris, any games that you've used house rules in that way to kind of make it easier for a new player or a younger player?
Yeah, that's actually a really good example that Adam just gave, and that's the first one that came to mind for me as well. That's probably where I've used the most, and a couple of games that I've used that on. One is Fossilis, which is actually a great example because I guess it's not technically a house rule because they do give you variants in the instruction manual purposely because this game is, it's kind of geared toward younger players and grown-up players too, but certainly with an eye toward kids enjoying it. And they give you some suggestions on how you can simplify things by taking out certain aspects of the game, like equipment cards and various things like that add some complexity that might be a little bit more challenging for a young player. I've also done something like that a little bit more informally with My Little Scythe, which I guess is a little ironic because it is a game that is also designed for kids. But when I first got that to play with my son, he was very young and he wasn't really ready to start getting into any of the complexity of it. And so I had a really, really stripped down version. And one thing, this is maybe a little bit of a different reason for the same set of rule changes in that same game. There was, at the age where he was playing that, I wasn't ready to introduce any violence yet. Maybe I was being overreactionary to the idea of violence, but in for those who are not familiar, in My Little Scythe as compared to regular Scythe, in Scythe you have combat and wars and battles. In My Little Scythe, if you end up in a combat scenario, you're having a pie fight. You're throwing pies at each other. And it made me, I'm kind of laughing at myself now because, it's like how mellow do you have to be before it's like, a pie fight is too much violence for you. But I took that out. And it also, it took a lot of the complexity out of the game as well, which I thought for a really, really young player was a perfectly fine thing to do.
Do you mind if I ask how old was he when you introduced him?
Oh my goodness. That's I don't remember when the game came out, but it was right about the time the game came out. So it was a few years ago. So he must have been...
Okay.
5.
I think 6 or 7, Chris. Maybe 6.
Yeah, maybe
I remember.
6. Yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and there's another good reason to take combat out in a game for younger players too, and that combat does have, it's got to take that element, and it does, so you can leave the other player feeling like hurt, like you picked on them. And so I've also found that, for young players, sometimes it's a good idea to try to tone that down just so that they don't feel picked on, regardless of, whether they can win or lose. It depends on the kid, though. I have another example, not for kids specifically, but where the complexity of the game benefited from being toned down. And I didn't actually create this variant, but I taught Space Base by John D. Clare in AEG to my parents. And they'll game with me. They don't like learning new games, but they play, reasonably complex or mid-weight games. Once they get the hang of it, they love a game. But I taught them Space Base, and they liked it, but they were ignoring all of the cards that had any complexity to them at all of the ships that you can buy that had like the charge counters and, that did anything special. If it didn't give you points, coins, or income, then they just ignored the cards. But they had a good time playing it. So a couple days later, my mom tells me, hey, so we picked up Space Base. And I was like, cool, I'm glad you guys liked it. A few days after that, she's like, yeah, but we've been playing it, but every time we play it, we just ignore all those cards. So we took them all out, and now we love the game. It's so much more fun. And it's funny because my wife also wasn't a big fan of Space Base the first few times I taught it. Like, we'd play it, and she'd always be like, now, how does that work? How does the timing work on that charge counter again? How does that work? I just can't get this. I'm not having fun with it. So I told her about my parents' variant. She's like, let's try that. And now she loves it. It's one of her favorite games in our collection. We just never, any of the cards that have charge counters on them or that don't have just the basic features, they're just left, they're kind of put aside in a separate part of the box. So it's interesting because I never would have thought a variant like that. I thought it would have taken away from the game. But in all honesty, for the weight of that game and how long it plays and all the luck that's in it anyway, it actually makes it smoother and slicker and to be honest, more fun. So I'm totally cool with the fact that they take it out. And I actually think it makes it a more enjoyable experience. So, not for kids, but still to just, make it lighter.
Do you ever play the game when you're not playing with your parents but use that variant?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's my wife now, like Danielle. That's the only way she wants to play it. We taught it to Jen. That's the way that we taught it to Jen because that's how Danielle likes to play it. She loves it. I tried adding the charge counters back in one time when Danielle wasn't playing with us, and Jen just ignored them all. She's like, well, we can play with them, but I'm not going to use them. So, and she beat me. She killed me by just ignoring them. So I was like, okay, wow, let's just leave them out now. So, that's probably the most extreme level of house rules that I play with in a kind of a modern hobby board game. I've got some other examples, but it fits right in with that, of the reasoning.
Rewinding a bit, Tim, I want to go like kind of big picture. To me, it kind of seems like in general, you're a little anti-house rule-ish. Is that true?
However people want to play games to have fun, whatever makes you have fun with it, that's great. I don't really care. But personally, I like to stick with what the designer intended for the game. I assume that they created a game that, if it's a game that I like, then I'll just play it the way that the designer intended. Most of the time, if I don't like the way it's designed, then I probably am not going to play it. I'm not going to try to figure out ways to make it more fun or interesting.
Okay.
But I do have a couple of examples of house rules that I do use. So, it's not a hard and fast rule for me personally either. Chris, did you have any other examples of reasons why somebody might house rule other than to simplify a game?
Here's one. It's a very, very simple rule change, barely even a rule change at all. But it was actually, I think, an interesting example because it has to do with COVID. That we have a couple, my wife and I, that we occasionally play games with over a video chat. And we needed to have a way that we could do that. And because we're not using something like, Tabletop Simulator, we're actually putting the game on a table and then we're each kind of doing our thing on the board. And we would usually play Wingspan. And for anybody who's played Wingspan is familiar that you draw off a common deck of cards. And so we had a variant where you could draw off of each couple had its own deck of cards. Everything else, except for potentially the bird feeder, would be the same. So you had a bird feeder and a deck of cards for each table that might have been slightly different, but we allowed for that to streamline the fact that we were both sitting there, with different boards in front of us, and that would allow us to play the game over a video connection rather than something like Tabletop Simulator. And I thought it actually worked pretty well. I don't think it affected the game quality at all.
That's really interesting, Chris, because so you're saying they had a copy on their side and you had a copy on your side, and you guys just had your own bird row in front of you.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of why Wingspan is pretty solitaire. Like, you literally, it probably wouldn't have mattered at all if you had, completely different sets of cards in front of the players.
No, it really didn't.
It seems surprisingly thematic too, that there could be, the same bird species in two different habitats. That's not unrealistic at all. So I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
that's a great reason to have a variant or house rule, and a great use of it, Chris. Nice. Some of the main reasons why I have a house rule is to improve the variability of gameplay. And I hate to say that because that's kind of saying, well, the designer didn't figure it out. It's not variable enough. But I'll give you a couple examples. And this does two things. In both cases, it does, I think, make the game more interesting. The choices more varied, so it's not as scripted. But it also does help simplify the choices for players who are playing for the first time. So let me just start. The first one is Orleans, or when properly pronounced, Orleans.
Wah, wah.
In Orleans, there's an action you can take that will get you another. It's a building, and so that building gives you new actions you can take. And the way the game is designed and the way that it's written in the rule book, you've got a stack of level 1 buildings and a stack of level 2 buildings. And so at some point in the game, you can only get level 1 buildings, and then after you've gotten a level 1, you can get level 2 buildings also. But the idea is that you would just pick up that whole stack of buildings and sort through it and find the building you want. I found the first time I played that, I played the game and kind of learned it, and then I taught it to a couple friends. And the first time somebody went to take a building, they look at this big stack of stuff and they're like, how would I have any idea which one of these I would use? A lot of it's all language independent, so it's all icon based. It's too much information overload for someone just starting to play the game. So the next time I played it, I changed it, and I've actually found that there's actually a fan variant listed on Board Game Geek that does the same thing. But I basically set it up so that there's 3 level 1 buildings and 3 level 2 buildings available at any time. They're randomly chosen off the stack. When somebody buys one from that group, then another one comes up on top. And it does two things. It makes it a lot easier for new players to kind of understand, or people that aren't playing as frequently, because I can just say like, hey, you're buying a building. Here's what these 3 do. It's really easy. They've got 3 simple choices. But also, it just makes it more fun. There's more interesting choices. You're not the first one to rush buy a building and always go to that same building in the stack because it's the strongest building. It's like, what can I do with the choices that are available to me? I probably wouldn't have house ruled it if it didn't make it such a challenge for new players and help people stay on a competitive footing. But I'm glad I did. I really enjoy the fact that it changes what your options are each game, and it just makes it feel a little bit more unique every game. I've got another example like that. Have you guys done anything for a similar reason? Have you used house rules for a similar reason?
I haven't done anything like that. Chris, have you done anything like that to
No.
increase variability or anything like that?
No, not really.
I've got one more really quick example since it's on that topic, and then we can move on to another one. And that other example is Champions of Midgard. And this is really simple, but Champions of Midgard at the beginning of the game, you're supposed to draft your player power, or kind of the clan leader you're supposed to be. In the way the game's written, it gives you a big stack. There's like 8 player powers, and then in reverse player order, you pick one of any of them. And I found the same thing happening, is that after we had a group of 4 people that were kind of playing over and over again, everybody went for the same leader every time. This is the strongest one. This is the second strongest. So you had 3 or 4 leaders that never got played. The strategies were really obvious. So instead, what I started doing is for setup, I would just pick one more than the number of players. And then in reverse player order, you draft. And so it was tougher choices. There were ones that were not always available, or different ones that got played. And it made it just a lot more fun for people that were playing the same game over and over again. But it also helped new players kind of put them on even footing without having to understand what's the meta game and what's the strongest game. So very similar to the Orleans reason.
I think that's kind of a trend with you in general, Tim. You like to pick random faction or random leader, random character for games that you play. And I think that's kind of nice because it prevents people from falling into picking the same leader every time and going down the same strategy and getting super comfortable. And it forces you to learn how to play other strategies and explore the game a little more, which at first I was like, Tim with this gosh darn variable player. But it's great. It helps you, explore the game a little more and find out more what the game has to offer. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks. To me, it just makes it more fun for sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So now, Tim, you've kind of given your general sense that you prefer to stick with the game the way that the designer intended it. And Adam, you seem pretty open to the idea of the rule changes. What's your take on it, sort of philosophically?
First of all, I don't know jack about game design, so I'll play a game as written by the rules. And if I start feeling comfortable with the game, or in certain situations I might tweak a little bit, or if I read some fan variants that sound interesting to me, then yeah, I'll try that and see kind of what happens. Philosophically, I'm very open to a house rule, especially if I think that house rule adds like an element of tactical play or strategic play. If it adds something to the game that I feel is not there. So one example is for Eclipse, and I read this fan variant on Board Game Geek, and I like drawing the next round's tech tiles during the current round. So all the players have an opportunity to see the upcoming text. And I think that makes that the pass first, a little more interesting than if it was just random tech tiles drawn that round. So you can have a little bit of look ahead, a little bit of planning, a little bit of foresight into what's coming up next. So anything that kind of does that for the game, I really enjoy. I really enjoy games that, you have a look ahead, a couple rounds, one round, couple rounds, and you can kind of plan ahead for that. So that's one little tweak I wouldn't mind making in any game if I saw an opportunity to do so.
I appreciate why you do that in that game, Adam, and it's fun to have that as an extra decision. But with a game that's got so much luck, you draw a turnover and exploration, and you have no idea what you're going to get, and dice rolling and stuff like that. It's funny that you're trying to make them more like strategic and tactical.
You say luck based, but I think it's been me and you battling out for first place in our last 3 or 4 games that we played. So I don't know.
Probably because we're looking at the tech tiles from the next round.
Probably because we're looking at the tech tiles. We're doing it right.
Well, it's funny because we've played that game a dozen times. I had no idea that was house rules. So now I feel kind of dirty.
I forced you into it, man. I'm really sorry. But
that's a great example. I don't have any specific examples where I've done that with games. What about you, Chris? Can you think of a game where maybe it would benefit from where there's a decision that feels too luck based and you could add something to it? Let me give you an example of something that I've heard talked about a lot, and I really don't like this idea, and that's with Tapestry. A lot of people complain about the luck of what Tapestry cards you get, and based on what civilizations you get. So there's a variant that's talked about all the time on forums that you should draw 2 Tapestry cards at the beginning of the game and keep one. And whenever you draw a Tapestry card, you draw 2 and you keep one. I hate the idea of it. Part of the fun for me is like working with what you're given and going for the challenge. What do you think about that, Chris? Do you think that would make Tapestry a more interesting or less interesting or fun game for you?
So let me take a step back and I'll answer your question. But before I even get there, I mean, I don't know if I haven't really thought about this too deeply, but as we're talking through it, I'm sort of feeling myself crystallize around a philosophical position here. And that's that I don't like the idea of house rules. And it's hard in that context to really think through, would that make it more enjoyable? I mean, maybe, but I also get the point that you're making that, that's not how the game was designed. I mean, I feel like there are hundreds, thousands of hours of play testing that go into these games. It's sort of like you're getting the director's cut. You're getting it the way that the game designer wanted you to have it. And I mean, I can't argue with the point that, once you buy a game, it's your game, play whatever way makes you happy. But for me, I don't choose to play house rules unless, Adam tricks me in, as I learned that he's done. Or if there's a real need to, like, dumbing it down a little bit for a child, making it a little bit simpler. But other than that, I want to play what was intended, and for that reason, it's almost like I don't care if it would make it maybe a little bit more fun. I want to play what was intended. I want to get the director's cut.
I'm pretty much on board with you there, Chris. One of the things that frustrates me to no end is seeing people, whether it's reviewers or just fans, users on Board Game Geek, that will look at the rules of a game, or they'll hear one review on a game and say like, hey, I know how to fix this. What if we tried it this way? They've never played the game, but they're already trying to come up with ways to fix the design as intended. And from my perspective, I'm like, man, if you feel that way about the game already, maybe pick a different game. There's lots of other great games out there. Or at least try it the way that the designer intended and see if it bothers you. Games are good for different people. Like, we don't all agree on the types of games we like. So just because one reviewer didn't like an element of a game, maybe they thought it was too luck-based or not luck-based enough or whatever, that doesn't mean that you have to go and try to fix it, because maybe you'll enjoy it just fine the way it is. So that is something that's really frustrating. I think there are some other good reasons to use house rules, and we've talked about a couple of them. Adam, any others from you? Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so before I continue with that, I want to dip in and adjust my philosophical outlook a little bit to specify what I'm trying to say. So in general, yeah, I want to play the game as designed. I'm very open to house rules. I agree. I think the game as written is the best way to play it, especially if you're going to go to like meetup groups or meet some random players and, they're going to bust out a game. The hope is that they play it by the rules. That makes it easier for random people to meet up and play a game because that's the way it's written. There's a standard there, and everyone who hears of that standard knows how to play the game. But yeah, I'm not against. I think that's part of the fun for me is kind of exploring what one little tweak or two might do to a game and seeing the ramifications of that. And I don't do that all the time. I practically never do it. But one game I have done it with is Dune Imperium, specifically when playing solo or two players against a house haggle. One thing I've done is adjust the kind of market row. I've seen some complaints that the cards can get stagnant up there, especially if there's high cost cards and you might not have enough cashola to buy some of those cards and get them into your deck. So I've tried, having a top row and a bottom row. I've split the deck into higher price cards and lower price cards. So the top row will have the more expensive cards and the bottom row has the cheaper cards, and 4 cards each instead of 5 cards, I think is what we tried. Just to see how much that tweak the game around or if it made it more fun. I'm not saying this is a suggested way to go, just to kind of explore and see the ramifications of that choice. And it was fun, made the little game pretty dynamic, kept the market row moving along. I think the game is fine with 3 players or 4 players, and there's plenty of movement up there, and I love the game tons and tons. So that's one tweak I've done just to kind of explore what happens. We did another variant too, where we started with the guild guy who lets you trash a card from your deck just to get things moving a little more dynamic and a little more explosive and see what happens. So, the game gets pretty crazy, pretty silly if you do it that way, but that was early on and just kind of explore what happens. Have you guys done anything like that? Just try something just to see what happens and how much it moves the game or makes it different?
Nope.
Never rules follower.
All right.
I mean, the couple of times I mentioned, the couple of things I mentioned already, but not that drastic of a change. I like the concept of the different rows, the different market rows, for example, in Dune. And, we see that in things like Star Realms, deck builders that have a random market row. Sometimes it can just get oh my God, everything's expensive. All you're doing is buying the cheap thing that gives you some more buy, and you wasted 3 rounds of purchasing. So I can definitely see that being a fun way to play and make it always a little bit more smoother of play. It seems more fiddly to set up though.
Well, these are ideas that I don't come up with on my own. That's kind of from Pax Pamir. They have, the cards, or Pax Pamir, or Through the Ages even, where the cards, as they move to the right, get a little more expensive. Yeah. And as they march down to the left, they get cheaper and cheaper. And eventually, if they're in the leftmost space, they trash themselves and go away. They're out of the game. Canvas, and their expansion that they're releasing, they're doing this too. There was some complaint that the market cards got a little static. So they're doing top row. They're almost exactly like Pax Pamir is what they're doing. So it's kind of interesting to see, people are taking these ideas to make things a little more dynamic and see how it works. And I appreciate it. I think it adds a little bit, something a little more interesting to the game.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder sometimes how these rules, what was going through the designer's head when they came up with a particular rule. Because the example that you just gave, Adam, you were talking about Eclipse and using the tech tree and putting the technologies that are going to be coming up next round, putting them out to the side around ahead so you can see what they are and you can plan. And that reminded me of something similar to that's in Cthulhu Realms. And folks have heard us talk on the show about Cthulhu Realms and Star Realms, and how, for me, I love them both. I think they're awesome games. But one really insignificant difference between the two is that in Cthulhu Realms, you do a similar thing. You always have the next card that's going to be put into the trade row gets displayed. And so you get to see what's going to be coming up next. And there's some logic behind that, because there's more of an opportunity to scrap cards in the trade row. So if you put yourself in a position where you can scrap a couple cards to get to the one you want to get to, that can be a great way to proceed. You don't have that opportunity in Star Realms, where the trade row it's completely random. You don't know what's coming next, and you kind of hope that something good is, but you don't really know. And the games are so similar, but they do have differences. And that's one of those differences, and it really makes me look at it and go, I wonder why the designers did that, and what were they thinking, and what was it about the game that made them say, in this one it's the right thing to do, and in this one it's not. And I guess I'm just sort of, noodling there on the idea that there's reasons why these things get chosen. I think I think that there's reasons why these things get chosen, and there's some subtle differences that probably a lot of thought has gone into.
Yeah, and I think there's good reasons why they don't do some of those things that we're doing, that we're playing around with. For example, the 2 different card roads in Dune, that does make setup, tougher. It makes splitting out the cards into different piles tougher. So you're kind of making the game less accessible, longer setup time. The thing with Eclipse, on a first play, having the extra text out there, it's completely useless. It's information overload. The person who's just trying to figure out what they're going to do that round is never looking further ahead. So it benefits an experienced player, but it hurts a less experienced player. So that's a good reason to not have something like that in a game. Not that it's not a lot more fun for people that know the game really well. So I think, sometimes those decisions probably just get missed, in the design and the development process. Someone just didn't think about it. It didn't occur to them to try this other way to do it. But a lot of the time they cut those things or change them because it makes the game clunkier, or just not as good for introduction to the game.
And now I know why Adam won those first few games.
I don't think I used that variant.
I don't think he won the first few. I think I got to take the credit for those.
I just know I didn't win. I don't think I've ever won a game of that.
Now, what's your guys' take on these rule books? You get to, you read the whole rule book, and then there's a section like, okay, here's a bunch of variations that I'm going to offer up. Isn't that kind of the same as the designer saying like, here's some house rules I've tried, or here's some house rules you could put in if you want to tweak the game? How different, for you is that than having your own house rule, or is that a house rule to you? Like, what do you guys think of those variants at the end of the rule book?
Yeah, so to me, and I just played a game tonight that actually has that exact thing going on. So to me, I always feel better about playing a variant, an official variant that's in the rule book that the designer created. They put it out there for you, and they might do it for a good reason. Terraforming Mars is a great example, right? Like the base game, again, you can't. There's no point to drafting cards if you don't know the value of the cards and the strengths and weakness and how you can value them and when you use them. So in the first game you play, you should just hand everybody 4 cards every round, and then they make decisions off what they've got. But once you get to know the cards, it's really fun to draft. And we did the same thing. Steve and I played Res Arcana tonight. We played 3 games of it. And the first game, because it was his first, we played the basic variant where you just hand everybody 8 cards, they go into their deck, and they randomly draw 3. But after we played the first game, we drafted the next 2, and that's fun. But it was a official variant that's in the rule book, and they do that for the purpose of like saying, here's the easiest way to get into the game. But once you know it, this might make it more strategic and more fun for you. So I like it when designers do that to some extent, and it's always fun to test out with theirs. If it's a game that you really love and you want to try it or take it to different depths. I like that offering's there.
I agree with Tim on that one.
Okay.
So there's one other main reason why people house rule, and I kind of mentioned this. A lot of people get on forums and say like, hey, that's broken. I read the rules about it. It seems broken. I'm going to come up with a rule to fix the balance on it. So balance is one of the reasons why people do house rules. And this is an area where I kind of house rule. So this is a little bit of a cheat here. But mainly if I know that a particular faction, or when you're talking asymmetric powers or things like that, when I know that one is considered overpowered, if I randomly get chosen that one, I'll usually put it back because I don't want that. I don't want to feel like I had an easier game with it. So that's not really a house rule, but if you're doing like random handout, Castles of Burgundy, when you're getting the different the boards that you start with, there's one board that's considered the most powerful. So I never take that board if it's handed to me. Or like Scythe is a great example. The Rustviet faction is supposed to be the easiest to play. Whether it's overpowered, that's maybe questionable, but it's supposed to be the easiest to play. So I've never played with Rustviet, but I love playing against people, especially when I'm teaching the game, that have that option. I can give them the faction that's easiest to play and try to give myself a little bit more of a challenge. So that's not really a house rule, I guess, but it does let you kind of handicap yourself while still playing the rules and not feeling like you're throwing the game with it. Do you guys ever do that? Does that strike home with you?
I need every advantage I can get, so I never get back. If I get the most powerful one, I'm going to take it, and I'm going to try to win. I still probably will lose a game, but I'm not there yet, Tim. I'm not good enough to get back the most powerful guy. So what about you, Chris?
Yeah, if I'm playing with someone who's never played a game before and I want them to win, I usually just subtly do some things wrong. I'm not that sophisticated.
I can't do it. I can't throw a game. That's the best I can do. All right. Sounds good. Did you guys have any other examples or any other games that you've house ruled or thoughts on it?
No, despite all my house rule talk, my big talk about house rule and everything, that's the only one, Eclipse, and I've messed around with Dune, but I prefer just the rules as written. Unless, I wouldn't be surprised if Rulebook 2.0 has some kind of movement on the Imperium row, the market row up there. And then just that little variant with Dice Throne. Those are really the only 3 that I've ever house ruled. So No, that's all I have. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, my take on it, like I said, I generally against the idea, but I think one thing I would say is I would encourage game designers who think they have some good variants to put them in the rule book, make them available to people. I mean, obviously people can figure some of these things out themselves, but we've all seen it. There are certain games where they put those in the rule book and they're sort of sanctioned variations. And I think that's great. The person who knows the game best is the person who designed it. And I will tend to trust what they say about it more than I would about someone who's not the designer. So keep it up.
Yeah, right on. Pretty similar to my feelings there. All right. Well, thanks, guys. That was a fun conversation about house rules. Let's talk about some things we're excited about in the world of games right after this. All right, welcome back. So we're going to talk about some games that we're excited about or other things we're excited about in the world of gaming this week. So Chris, what do you have? What's got you pumped up?
I've got a couple. One is that I just got today my household goods that have been shipped to me after 7 months on the road in my move from from Los Angeles to Portland by way of the East Coast. And what that means is I just got probably 5-6 crates full of board games that are sitting in my house. I haven't opened them yet. I haven't had a chance to. But they are sitting there waiting for me to open them. And I just want to dive into them and just start, touching the miniatures and looking at the art and all this stuff. And so I am absolutely thrilled to death. So that's going to start tomorrow. Pretty soon I'll be going to bed tomorrow morning.
Any particular game, Chris, are there any particular games that you haven't had a chance to play yet through all of this that you're really excited to open up for the first time?
The funny thing is the one I'm most excited about is one that I have played but have only played on Tabletop Simulator, and that's Godspeed, which I've really enjoyed. We played a couple times in the past few months, but I haven't actually played in real life with the physical game, and I'm so excited to take that out and actually look at the pieces and see how that would feel in real life, because I really do enjoy that game.
How many other ones do you have that are like new, that are untouched, or are these all your old games from your old house just coming up to meet you up in Portland?
It's a combination. It's a bunch of old games, and there's a couple that came in. They were Kickstarters that were sort of rolling in right as I was getting ready to transition. So I've got a few things in there that I've owned before I left, but I never really had a chance to explore, never had a chance to play them, never even really had a chance to dig in and look at the art, read the rules, and that kind of thing. So that I'm kind of excited about. The other thing is I saw on Twitter the other day, and it got me super excited. And I'm dying to see what this ends up being. I haven't looked into it yet, and there's some information online, and I believe it's hitting Kickstarter on June 15th, called First Ascent. And it's a rock climbing game. And as I looked at this, I said to myself, my God, what a brilliant idea. Why has nobody thought of this before? It's such a natural. The board itself looks kind of like a mountain with separated out into little hexes, and you place tiles there, it looks like. And there's some rules on there I haven't read yet, so I may be saying things absolutely wrong, but I'm just sort of going by my initial impression of it. And then as you put the hexes out, each one has different requirements. Like it might be a ledge, or it might be a crevice or something, that would suggest you need to do one thing or another to pass by that particular piece of terrain. And you have to have the right ability or the right power, whatever it is that the resources are in the game, you have to have the right ones to be able to make it past a point. And it just looks super fun. I like that it's got that sort of simple, colorful art. I really enjoy it. It reminds me a little bit graphically of something like Parks, which I love. And this is one that I'm definitely going to be checking out when it hits Kickstarter coming up next month.
So this game looks pretty cool, and it is designed, and the art is also by Kate Adi, if I'm pronouncing that last name right, and she's also self-publishing this game. So this is from what I can tell, a one-person game. Yeah, this game looks really cool. I love the artwork on it, and now I'm really interested in checking into it a little bit more. Chris is looking at some pictures on here. It looks like a pretty cool concept.
That sounds rad.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in checking it out more.
What about you, Tim? What are you looking forward to, or what have you been playing this week?
Yeah, just a couple things I'll talk about really quickly. The first is I had mentioned a few weeks ago that I was really excited about Red Cathedral, and I ordered it. And so I've had a chance to play it a couple times now. I played it at the solo, I played 2-player, and I played 3-player with it. I really like this game. It comes in a fairly small box, but it's a really solid, resource management kind of Euro. Feels like a pretty traditional Euro as far as the choices you're making and things like that. But I like it. It's quick to set up and teach. It's got a lot of really nice components for what it is. Tough, thinky choices, but in a fairly simple package. And so my first few plays of it, I've really liked. I can't wait to play it some more. It's a game that I think is going to stick around in my collection for a while. So that's number one. Really, really love that game so far. And then the other one that I'm really excited about is a game by Mind Clash Games called VoidFall. And that's coming out. It's coming to Kickstarter later this year. David Turksey's the designer. He co-designed it. I'm sorry, I don't have the other designer's name with me right now, but he co-designed it. And it's put out by Mind Clash Games. And David Turksey and Mind Clash put out Anachrony. So that's got me really excited. Just that combination, because I really love what they did with Anachrony. It got me interested. And then it said it's a 4X game, think like Eclipse, for Euro lovers, and that's me. So like the idea of a game that brings the kind of fun and theme and epicness of Eclipse, but a true Euro, I'm really excited about that. I can't wait to dig into it. Ian O'Toole looks like, I believe Ian O'Toole is doing the artwork on it. The cover looks amazing. I've seen he's been posting some sketches on Twitter of some of the ships he's working on, and it looks really cool. So I don't know much about it other than that right now, but that's got me psyched. And I'm not a big kickstarting new designs type of person, but I just might have to get in on that one.
Yeah, that looks really cool.
I feel like you're kickstarting anything these days, Tim.
No. The other game that I mentioned I was kickstarting actually was I was only kickstarting because I wanted to support the idea behind it, and it was a game about trying to cut carbon emissions as a kind of a global group. And it looked like an interesting co-op game. It's probably not a game that is really for me, but I wanted to support it, so I backed it. But I just actually heard today that they're canceling the Kickstarter and they're going to try to relaunch it, try to remessage it, and get it in front of some more people. So it wasn't successful, but that's the only reason I backed that is just because I wanted to support the project, not to get the game. So a little different reasoning there.
Yeah, it looked like it didn't quite have the momentum. I took a look at that game too. It looked pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And on Red Cathedral, ever since you mentioned that, I haven't stopped hearing about it. It's been everywhere. And then VoidFall, yeah, the hype is generating big time on VoidFall. It's hard not to when you're Mind Clash games that are putting out hit after hit after hit. So it'll be interesting. It'll be fun to follow that and try to resist it on Kickstarter, which I don't think I will.
I saw some of the pictures that you had posted, Tim, of Red Cathedral, and I have to admit, when you described that during our one of our recent episodes, I was like, yeah, dry Euro. That sounds great. But honestly, seeing those pictures, that looks really cool. That looks like a fun game.
Yeah, just in case it's helpful for anyone that wants to know how to play it, the concept is that you're all working together. You're architects that have been hired by, the king or czar or whatever to help build the famous, was it St. Basilica's Chapel, I think, in Red Square in Russia, so the Red Cathedral. But what happens is that there's a random card shows at the beginning of the game that tells you what the towers are going to look like. And so you put these little blueprint cards up in the shape of the tower, and they all have little bonuses that are randomly put on them, as well as costs on each of the cards. So the goal is to try to collect resources and build segments of this tower. And you're kind of racing to do that. The game ends when somebody builds 6 segments. But as you build a segment, they're worth different points and things like that. But a couple of the really unique mechanisms here. Number one is that if you claim a segment of the tower that you're going to work on, and somebody else claims a segment above it and builds it before yours, you lose points. So you have an opportunity to interact with other players and try to race them. And you can really impact the resources that are available to them. So I'll get to that in just a second. The second really cool mechanism here is that the scoring track has 2 types of scoring. It has recognition and it has prestige. And recognition is every point around the score track, but prestige kind of jumps, like every 5 points early on the score track is prestige. So there's these cool opportunities where you can just get a prestige point and it gets you like 5 points, but only if you were at a full prestige behind it, and then as you get further up the track, it changes. So some really interesting decisions on when's the right time to pay some money to get prestige versus just taking a point and things like that. But the coolest part of it is the way you get the resources, and it's this rondel. It's I think 12 spaces around the board, each with a different resource on it. Maybe not 12, I don't remember, 8 spaces or something like that. But each of them has a different resource on it, and that's randomly set up every game. And then there's 5 different colored dice. And so what happens is that if you want to take a resource, you have to find a dice and move a dice that number of pips so that it would end on the space that has the resource you want to collect on it. And then as soon as you do that, you roll that dice so that the next person has different choices to make. You get the resource, but if a different dice had already been on that space, you get double the number of resources. Or if there's a third dice, you get triple the number of resources. So you have the risk of trying to get something you want and setting another player up for a really massive turn. But you can also completely block what they're trying to do, because all you have to do is you can look and see what's the resource they're trying to get to build their segment, and I'm going to take the dice that would allow them to get there. But there are some ways to mitigate it and manipulate those dice. But it's a really fun system and really thinky, and I can see, just getting caught up in like, oh my God, I really need this one resource. How am I going to make it happen? But not let Jen get what she needs or let Danielle get what she needs. I found it really fun so far. So hopefully that helps if anyone was kind of interested in that to understand how it plays a little bit. Anyway, Adam, that's me rambling again for a long time. What are you excited about this week?
I'm excited about a few things. First, I'll talk about the Kickstarter rival that came in today. That's Kemet, Blood and Sand. And that's by Madigo Games. And let me look up the designer here. Chris, what do you think of those pictures that I put up of Kemet?
That looks so cool. I wish I backed it.
So the designers there are Jacques Barriot and Guillaume Montiage. Publisher is Madigo Games. And this is a big old Kickstarter. It's in, it looks like the Nile Delta is where this game takes place. And it's, I don't know much about the game other than it's all kinds of these characters on a map duking it out for supremacy. I know there's these kind of menus. You can look at the powers of each of these different giant minis you could play on there. I think there's some card drafting. It almost gave me like a little bit of a Blood Rage vibe, just quickly glancing at the rules. I bought it based on, I really like Inish, and same publisher as Inish. And then I've just heard so many good things about it. And this updated rules version, updated production, looks outstanding. So I'm very excited to play Kemet.
I noticed when you took a picture of it, one of the first things you took a picture of was the big old Cthulhu mini that came in the box there. Does it turn out, is that part of the whole base pledge, or was that like an add-on that had to be purchased,
I think it's I think it's part of the Kickstarter exclusives. I don't know what all packages I bought, this and that. I just put in my credit card number and give me this. So I think it is part of, I think you can buy them as an add-on, separate, like expansion. So if you're going to go retail, I'd probably have to buy this one extra. It's weird. They did send like the little boxes to stash these extra big minis in as if I purchased them separate. So I don't know. That's kind of a weird.
That's funny. But they all fit in the base box. They all fit in the box without.
I haven't tried yet. All the stuff's just spewed all over my table there. So, and then next is a slew of games that I was introduced to by Matthew Jude. He's a reviewer from This Game is Broken. He has a YouTube channel. He's fantastic. He's hilarious. I love the way he presents games. I love his sense of humor. Board game publishers, if you want your game to get bought by me, then have Matthew Jude review it. Pay him lots and lots of money. If that's not a very poor pitch for Matthew Jude, then I don't know what is. But the games that I bought were Dice Throne was one of them. I bought a bunch of sets of that game. I was telling Tim and Chris earlier, and Steve too, that Dice Throne is kind of like a cross between Yahtzee and Star Realms. I talked about it earlier, taking out the card management part of the game and just rolling some dice. You could do that if you want. You could just roll some dice, roll 3 times, try to make a run or a large run or a short run, a small run, match up some symbols, do this, do that, and then boom, try to slaughter the other guy. That's the game. You're basically going head to head. You could play 3-4. You could play more players than that if you want to, and you can play teams. You can play 2-on-2. All these variants, or were they house rules at one time and became official rule? Who knows? But the game is fun. The art is fantastic. Have you guys tried Dice Throne at all? Any interest in trying that?
I haven't tried it. I would like to. It's probably a little bit on the lighter side for something that it's going to get a lot of play with me, which is why I haven't picked it up. But it looks really, I love the production. I love the artwork they used in it and the colorful characters that are in it. And I love the concept of that you've got these different powers you can hit based on your dice rolls. And you got to push your luck sometimes. Like you might have part of a really good roll, kind of like in Yahtzee, right? You got the 3 ones, and it's completely useless if you don't get the other 2 ones with it. But if you get lucky, if you roll the last 2 ones, it's awesome. And Dice Throw kind of gives me those feelings. I don't know much about the deck building or some of the other mechanisms of it, but it seems like a fun, kind of King of Tokyo level type of game. So I would love to play it sometime. I'd love to hear, how it stands out for you, or how it holds up for you as you get a little bit more playing with it.
Yeah, we'll see. I think it'll be fun. So yeah, you get these combat points at the beginning of every round, and you can kind of add them up, and you can spin those to play these cards that'll help you mitigate your rolls, or flip 2 dice to the face that you want. So you can kind of save up these cards and go for the big roll and do a big old crushing move at the right time.
Why did you compare it to Star Realms? Just the head-to-head part of it, or is there actually some deck building in it?
You start at 50 health. Both players start at 50 health, and it trickles down to 0. So that's the mechanic there. That's
just a head-to-head, combat game.
Yep, the head-to-head combat is where I get the very dice from. So no deck building as far as I can tell, unless I'm going to house. Maybe I'll house. We'll see.
Make sure to use two market rows, though.
Yeah, exactly right. The designer there is Nate Chatelier and Manny Tremblay, and that's published by Roxy Games here in the States. The next game, the final game I was talking about, is High Society. Again, Matthew Jude reviewed this one. I've heard about it before. It's
Rainer Knizia.
Yeah. And it's published by Ravensburger. And this is just it's kind of a bidding game, but everybody has the same denominations of cards that they can use to bid. I think it's 1 through 10 and a couple of higher denominations. So as these cards are coming out, you're trying to bid on them to get the most prestige points or status points. I forget what they're called. And you're watching as these bids go round and round and round, increasing values to see, who's bidding the most and collecting these cards. And at the end of the game, if you're the person that did bid the most, well, you've spent all your money, you've blown your whole fortune trying to be the most prestigious, and you're out. You lose the game. You can't win. Basically, whoever has the most prestige wins the game, unless that person spent the most money. It's supposed to be great. I've heard so many things about it from so many different people. It's a quick game. 20 minutes, 30-minute game, high interaction, high volatility, and it looks really, really fun. So looking forward to playing that.
That sounds fun.
Ravensburger isn't known for their production quality. How does the game look to you? It's just a deck of cards, basically?
Post-production Adam chiming in here. The version that I own is actually the Osprey Games version, not the Ravensburger. So the Osprey one is very nice. Everything you're about to hear me talk about pertains to the Osprey Games. Can't speak to Ravensburger. Fortunately, there isn't much to produce. There's a small deck of cards, and then there's a large deck. I think larger than tarot size, I think. And the art on these cards is beautiful. It has that, I don't know the art style, Art Nouveau, I think it is, like that kind of French, and cats and coffee and ovals is what I think of. So it's beautiful. It's very much that style of art, and I love it. It fits the theme of high society France and scoffing at other people and looking at people below you and having them polish your shoes. That kind of sense is what you get from the game.
Cool. That sounds like a fun TimCon filler game. So hopefully we get to play that out a little bit later.
I think it will be.
All right on. Well, thanks guys. That sounds like some interesting stuff going on this week. If you enjoyed the conversation and would like to chat with us about it, hit us up on social media. You can find us on Twitter at BG_hot takes and on Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care, everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.